So somebody wants to own a laundromat, buy a building, fill it with machines, and watch quarters and app payments roll in while barely lifting a finger. That is the pitch that gets repeated endlessly online, the ultimate passive income business, a place that runs itself while the owner collects money from a distance. It is one of the most persistent myths in small business ownership, and like most persistent myths, it contains a small grain of truth wrapped around a much larger misunderstanding. A laundromat can eventually become close to passive, but almost nobody understands what has to happen first, how much capital gets locked into steel and concrete before the first dollar arrives, and how brutally unforgiving the math becomes the moment a single assumption goes wrong. Walk into a busy laundromat on a Sunday afternoon and it looks like the easiest business in the world. Every machine is running, the parking lot is full, and nobody behind a counter is even required, because most of the labor already happened, months or years earlier, in the form of a very large check written to equipment distributors and a landlord. That upfront reality is the entire story of this business, and once it is understood, everything else about laundromat economics falls into place. Before a single quarter drops into a slot, there is a wall of costs that catches almost every first-time buyer off guard. The first major decision is whether to buy an existing laundromat or build one from scratch, and the two paths could not look more different financially. Buying an existing, already operating laundromat with a proven customer base and existing equipment typically costs anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000, depending on size, location, and how recently the machines were replaced. Building a laundromat from the ground up, meanwhile, is a fundamentally different and far larger undertaking. A new laundromat build requires commercial space, typically 2,000 to 4,000 square feet, in a location with heavy foot traffic and, critically, proximity to apartment buildings and rental housing, because the overwhelming majority of laundromat customers do not own a washer and dryer at home. Lease or purchase costs for that space vary enormously by market, but build-out costs alone, meaning plumbing, electrical upgrades, ventilation, flooring, and fixtures, commonly run between $200,000 and $400,000 before a single machine is installed. Then comes the equipment itself, and this is where the real capital disappears. A commercial washing machine costs anywhere from $2,000 to $15,000 depending on capacity, with large capacity machines built for comforters and bulk loads sitting at the high end of that range. A commercial dryer runs similarly, from $2,000 to $8,000. A mid-size laundromat needs 20 to 40 washers and a similar number of dryers to operate at meaningful scale, and multiplying that out, equipment alone for a new laundromat commonly costs $300,000 to $800,000. Insight punch. The machines cost more than most people's entire life savings, and they haven't washed a single shirt yet. Add plumbing capable of handling dozens of simultaneous water hookups, electrical service upgraded to handle the enormous power draw of commercial dryers, industrial-grade ventilation to exhaust heat and lint safely, and a fire suppression system that most jurisdictions require given the combustible nature of lint. And the full cost to open a new laundromat from scratch commonly lands somewhere between $500,000 and $1.5 million. This is before marketing, before a cash reserve to survive the slow opening months, and before the owner has processed a single load of laundry. Here is the detail that surprises almost every prospective owner. Unlike many small businesses, a laundromat's core assets, the washers and dryers, are wasting assets from the moment they are installed. Commercial washing machines run through hundreds of cycles a month, every single day of the year. And that punishing usage schedule means most commercial machines have a realistic useful life of 7 to 12 years before they need replacement, and that clock starts ticking on day one, regardless of how well the machines are maintained. This creates something that does not exist in most small businesses, a permanent, unavoidable equipment replacement reserve that a serious owner has to fund from month one, because roughly 1/10 to 1/15 of the entire equipment fleet will need replacement every single year on a rolling basis, forever, for as long as the business operates. An owner who does not plan for this discovers the problem the hard way when several machines fail in the same year and there is no reserve to cover $40,000 or $50,000 in sudden replacement costs. Now consider utilities, because this is the operating cost that separates a laundromat from almost every other small business, and it is the one that new owners consistently underestimate by the widest margin. Water and sewer costs for a laundromat are enormous because every wash cycle uses somewhere between 15 and 40 gallons of water, depending on machine size and cycle type. and a busy laundromat running dozens of loads a day can consume tens of thousands of gallons of water monthly. Many municipalities charge sewer fees based on metered water usage, which means every gallon gets billed twice, once coming in and once going out. Gas or electric costs for drying are equally punishing. Commercial dryers require substantial energy to generate the heat needed to dry a full load in a reasonable cycle time, and a laundromat running dryers continuously throughout operating hours can see monthly utility bills, combining water, sewer, gas, and electric, that run anywhere from $3,000 to $15,000 depending on the size of the location and local utility rates. For a small independent laundromat, utilities alone can consume 20 to 30% of total revenue, a percentage that dwarfs the utility costs of almost any comparably sized retail business. Insight punch. Every single wash cycle is a tiny transaction with the water company and the power company before the owner ever sees a dime. This is why location and machine efficiency matter so much more in this business than in most others. Modern high-efficiency washing machines use significantly less water and less energy per cycle than older models, and the difference in utility costs between an aging fleet of inefficient machines and a modern high-efficiency fleet can total tens of thousands of dollars a year on a mid-sized location. Owners who inherit an old machine fleet when buying an existing laundromat often discover that the previous owner's razor-thin profit margin was being quietly propped up by depreciated, half-broken equipment that is about to require a very expensive fleet-wide replacement. Now let's talk about how a laundromat actually generates revenue, because the model is deceptively simple on the surface and genuinely intricate underneath. The core revenue stream is per-load pricing, charged either through coin mechanisms or, increasingly, through card and mobile app payment systems that have largely replaced quarters in newer locations. A standard washer load typically costs customers somewhere between $2 and $8 depending on machine size and local market pricing, while dryer time is often billed in smaller increments, commonly $1 or so per 15 to 20 minutes of drying time. The math behind a single machine's daily revenue potential looks attractive in isolation. A washing machine that completes 4 to 6 loads a day, 7 days a week, at an average of $4 per load, generates somewhere between $100 and $150 a week per machine, and multiplied across 30 or 40 machines, that adds up to a meaningful weekly revenue figure. But this calculation assumes consistent utilization throughout the day, and real-world laundromat traffic is anything but consistent. Laundromat traffic follows a pronounced daily and weekly rhythm that experienced owners plan their entire operation around. Weekday mornings and early afternoons are typically slow, with a modest bump around lunch hours from customers running quick errands. The real traffic surge happens on weekday evenings after work and, most dramatically, on weekends, particularly Saturday and Sunday afternoons, when utilization can spike to near total machine occupancy for hours at a stretch. This means a laundromat's entire weekly revenue is disproportionately generated during a relatively narrow window of peak hours, and machines sitting idle during slow weekday mornings represent pure lost capacity that can never be recovered, because unlike a hotel room, an empty washing machine cannot be resold later that same day. Insight punch. Half the machines in the building are earning real money only a few hours a day. The rest of the time, they're just very expensive furniture. This uneven utilization pattern is precisely why smart laundromat owners chase secondary revenue streams that fill in the gaps and improve overall unit economics. Vending machines selling detergent, dryer sheets, snacks, and drinks are a near-universal addition, and while individually low margin, they generate meaningful additional revenue with essentially zero marginal labor cost once installed. Change machines, still necessary even in the app payment era for customers who prefer cash, generate a small transaction fee on every exchange. Many locations now offer wash and fold service, where customers drop off laundry and staff wash, dry, and fold it for a per-pound fee, typically running $1.50 to $3 per pound. This service commands dramatically higher margins than self-service machine time because customers are paying for convenience and time savings, not just machine access, though it does require hiring staff, which shifts the labor equation the self-service model was designed to avoid. Some larger locations have added dry cleaning drop-off partnerships, arcade games, free Wi-Fi paired with comfortable seating to encourage customers to stay and spend more during their visit, and even small cafe counters selling coffee and snacks. Each of these additions chips away at the core problem of a laundromat's revenue model. The physical machines can only generate revenue when someone is actively using them, and every hour of unused capacity is permanently lost income. Now add the cost of labor, and here the laundromat industry reveals one of its most important strategic forks. A purely self-service, unattended laundromat can theoretically run with minimal staffing, perhaps a part-time attendant a few hours a day to handle cleaning, minor machine troubleshooting, and customer questions, alongside a maintenance technician who visits periodically or on an as-needed basis for repairs. This model keeps labor costs remarkably low compared to almost any other retail business, often under 10% of revenue. However, unattended laundromats face a well-documented set of problems. Vandalism, theft from coin mechanisms, and general lack of cleanliness tend to be worse without consistent staff presence, and a laundromat that develops a reputation for being dirty, poorly maintained, or unsafe will bleed customers to a cleaner competitor, even if that competitor charges slightly more per load. Many successful owners have concluded that a modest investment in attendant staffing, someone present during peak hours to keep the facility clean and address problems immediately, pays for itself many times over through improved customer retention and reduced vandalism losses. Insight Punch: an unstaffed laundromat saves money on payroll and quietly loses customers to the clean laundromat down the street. Maintenance costs deserve their own detailed examination because this is where laundromat economics diverge sharply from almost any other small business model. Commercial washers and dryers are mechanically complex machines running under constant, punishing daily use. And unlike a retail store, where equipment failure is a rare inconvenience, machine breakdowns in a laundromat are a routine, expected, and ongoing operating cost. Bearing replacements, belt failures, coin mechanism jams, and increasingly, in card and app-based systems, payment terminal malfunctions all require prompt attention because a broken machine generates zero revenue while still occupying valuable floor space and, worse, creates a visibly bad impression for every customer who walks past an out-of-order sign. A well-run laundromat typically budgets somewhere between 5 and 10% of gross revenue for ongoing maintenance and repair, and this figure rises significantly for locations that inherited an older equipment fleet rather than starting with newer, more reliable machines. Some owners choose to handle basic maintenance themselves to control costs, while others contract with a dedicated commercial laundry equipment technician, and the right choice often depends on the owner's own mechanical aptitude and how many locations they are managing simultaneously. Insurance is another cost category that runs higher for laundromats than many comparably sized retail operations, driven primarily by fire risk from lint accumulation and dryer heat, water damage risk from the sheer volume of plumbing and water flow running through the building continuously, and general liability exposure from a facility that is often open extended hours, sometimes 24 hours a day, with limited staff supervision. Commercial property and liability insurance for a laundromat commonly runs several $1,000s a year higher than a comparably sized retail space with no significant water or fire exposure. Now let's put together what a realistic laundromat's financial picture actually looks like. Consider a mid-sized laundromat with 30 washers and 25 dryers, generating average monthly revenue of $40,000. A reasonable figure for a well-located, well-maintained facility in a market with strong apartment density nearby. Against that revenue, utilities typically consume 25% or roughly $10,000 monthly. Rent or mortgage payment on the commercial space commonly runs another 15 to 20%, $5,000 to $8,000. Maintenance and equipment reserve funding takes another 8%, roughly $3,200. Insurance, licensing, and miscellaneous operating costs consume another 5%, $2,000. If the location employs even minimal part-time attendant staffing, labor adds another 8 to 10%, $3,000 to $4,000. Adding those costs together, total operating expenses commonly consume 60 to 70% of gross revenue, leaving a net operating margin somewhere between 30 and 40% before accounting for debt service on the original investment. On our example location generating $40,000 monthly, that translates to $12,000 to $16,000 in monthly profit before debt service, or roughly $150,000 to nearly $200,000 annually. That figure sounds genuinely attractive, and for a well-run, well-located laundromat with efficient modern equipment, it can be real and sustainable. But this is precisely where the difference between the optimistic scenario and the realistic scenario becomes enormous, because that healthy margin assumes several things are simultaneously true. Reasonably consistent utilization throughout the week, a modern equipment fleet with manageable maintenance costs, controlled utility expenses through efficient machines, and no major unexpected equipment failures compressing the maintenance budget in a given year. The realistic difficult scenario looks like this, and it does not require anything dramatic to trigger it. A new large apartment complex nearby adds in-unit washers and dryers as a standard amenity, permanently reducing the laundromat's addressable customer base in that immediate area. Utility rates rise, as they have across much of the country in recent years, adding meaningfully to what was already the largest single expense category. Several machines from an aging fleet fail within the same few months, requiring unplanned replacement spending that consumes an entire year's maintenance reserve at once. A new competing laundromat opens 2 blocks away with newer, more efficient machines and a cleaner facility, pulling price-sensitive customers away during exactly the peak hours that used to anchor the week's revenue. Under those conditions, a location that was generating comfortable double-digit percentage margins can see that margin compressed into the single digits within a single difficult year, and because so much of the original investment was financed through debt, that compressed margin might not even cover debt service, turning a business that looked profitable on paper into one that is quietly consuming the owner's cash reserves every single month. This is the structural lesson that runs through the entire laundromat industry. Full machines and a busy parking lot on a Saturday afternoon tell an outside observer almost nothing about the underlying financial health of the business. 2 laundromats that look identically busy from the sidewalk can have completely different financial realities depending on their equipment age, their utility efficiency, their debt load from the original purchase or build-out, and how much of their weekly revenue is concentrated into a narrow handful of peak hours versus spread more evenly across the full week. There is also a meaningful difference between owning a single laundromat and building a small portfolio of multiple locations, and this is where the most successful operators in this industry actually make their money. A single location owner is exposed entirely to the fortunes of one neighborhood, one competitive landscape, and one equipment fleet's maintenance cycle. An owner running 3, 5, or 10 locations across a region gains real structural advantages, purchasing leverage when buying equipment and parts in bulk from distributors. The ability to shift a maintenance technician between locations rather than paying for dedicated service at each site individually, shared administrative and accounting overhead spread across significantly more revenue, and enough diversification that a bad year at one location, whether from a new competitor or an unexpected string of equipment failures, does not threaten the survival of the overall business. Insight Punch: one laundromat is a machine-filled room you have to watch closely. 5 laundromats is a business with room to absorb a bad month. Location selection carries enormous weight in this industry, arguably as much as in almost any small business category, because laundromat customers are overwhelmingly driven by proximity and convenience rather than brand loyalty. Renters without in-unit laundry represent the core customer base, which means laundromat viability correlates directly with nearby rental housing density, particularly older apartment buildings and multifamily housing that predate the now common practice of building in-unit laundry connections into new residential construction. A laundromat built in a neighborhood dominated by single-family homes with garages and driveways, where most residents already own washers and dryers, is fighting an uphill battle regardless of how modern or clean the facility is. Demographic trends add a long-term structural consideration that thoughtful owners have to factor into their investment horizon. Newer apartment construction increasingly includes in-unit laundry connections as a standard amenity, which means the total addressable market for coin laundromats has been gradually shrinking in markets with significant new residential construction, even as it remains robust or even growing in older urban neighborhoods with aging housing stock and slower new construction. An owner evaluating a location purely on current foot traffic without considering the trajectory of nearby residential development can find themselves owning a shrinking asset a decade into ownership. At the same time, this same demographic pressure has pushed many successful operators toward the wash and fold and commercial account segments of the business, serving customers who do have in-unit machines at home but lack the time or desire to do laundry themselves, alongside commercial accounts like short-term rental property managers, small hotels, and group homes that need consistent, high-volume laundry service on an ongoing contractual basis. These segments command meaningfully higher margins than coin-operated self-service revenue and represent a genuine growth path in markets where the traditional self-service customer base is gradually eroding. Now let's consider the full realistic outcome range for someone entering this business today. In the optimistic scenario, An owner buys or builds a well-located laundromat with modern, efficient equipment in a neighborhood with strong rental density and limited nearby competition, maintains disciplined equipment reserve funding from day one, and gradually adds wash and fold or commercial account revenue to smooth out the uneven self-service utilization pattern. That location can generate the kind of 30 to 40% operating margin described earlier, translating into genuinely substantial annual profit relative to the ongoing time commitment required, which for a well-systemized single location can be remarkably light once the business is established and running smoothly. In the realistic difficult scenario, an owner underestimates utility costs, buys an aging equipment fleet without adequately pricing in near-term replacement costs, faces new nearby competition or apartment construction that erodes the customer base, and discovers that debt service on the original 6 or 7-figure investment consumes most or all of the operating margin in a challenging year. The gap between these two outcomes on an identical-looking piece of real estate, with identical-looking machines, can be well over $100,000 annually, and almost none of that difference is visible simply by walking past the building and observing how many machines are running. The owners who build genuinely durable, profitable laundromat businesses are rarely the ones who bought into the passive income fantasy and assumed the machines would simply run themselves indefinitely. They are the ones who treated equipment replacement as an unavoidable, permanent line item from the very first month rather than a future problem, who chose locations based on rigorous analysis of nearby rental housing density rather than convenient availability, who invested in efficient modern machines that quietly saved tens of thousands of dollars a year in utility costs, and who diversified revenue beyond pure self-service coin drops into wash and fold and commercial accounts long before demographic shifts made that diversification necessary for survival. The machines humming away on a Saturday afternoon are the story customers see. The actual business lives underneath it, in the equipment replacement reserve, the utility bill, and the maintenance log that determines whether this quietly becomes one of the most genuinely passive small businesses available, or a slow-motion cash drain hiding behind a busy parking lot.